Okay.
And we're live. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Microwave Extravaganza podcast, episode 12 of Filthy Rich Capitalists. That's the name of this episode because I figured it makes sense. My name is Arcean, as you all know. I am the sexiest angel on the internet because Castiel is not that interesting.
Castiel's a bitch.
What?
Castiel's a bitch.
He was cool when he first came on Supernatural. Now he's nothing.
I believe the term for that is badass decay.
Yes, and this is Filthy Heretic. Say hello, Filthy.
Oh, hi. I'm the heretic.
Yes, we will burn him later, but don't you worry.
And of course, my fireproof ropes, by the way. It's fine.
It's okay. And then, of course, this is the most professional stream on the internet. Wink, wink. Today, we are sponsored once again in part by the Catholic Church. Have you ever wanted your faith to be more meaningful than it was before? Remember, if you believe in open borders, if you believe in personal sovereignty and the right to protect yourself, you're going to go straight to hell. So please, join the Catholic Church. Our Pope has been doing his very best to make sure that all the world's Jews, all the world's Christians, know he's on their side.
Wait. One problem. Our Pope said that there's no hell.
What the fuck?
Yeah, that was a thing like a month ago. You don't remember that?
Oh, I for about a month, I've been trying to design, and I'm so sorry. Volunteers, consumer, if you're listening to this right now, I actually tried testing out one of my products that I was gonna have you sponsor when I put up the Kickstarter. Holy shit, I messed up royally on the pressure system.
Just a quick thing. If I'm going to be putting this on my channel, could you please not swear? It's just a stylistic thing I prefer to do.
All right, can you bleep that?
Yes, that's not hard.
All right. So, oh my god, it was really. Are you Christian?
I actually am Catholic.
Oh, hooray, fellow! I love how so many people on the left will always remind us. By the way, did you know that there are pedophiles in the church? And by the way, did you know that there are pedophiles in the church? Oh, by the way, did I remind you one more time as I beat you over the head? Did you know that there were pedophiles back then? And ignore the fact that there's plenty of them in the school system. That's just not important. It's just not important. Don't pay attention to the man behind the curtain. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, it's like the one place that's like more. I think it's like not even like 7 to 10, but it's like 70 to 100 times more likely to be preyed upon by a teacher than by a priest. And for some reason, we're okay with having our kids there for 40 hours a week. It's literally a full-time job to basically be exposed to a prison full of pedophiles. Great work, statism.
Well, here's the thing. I would be willing to have it where everyone would be communally asked to donate to an open-ended school, but not taxed.
Well, here's the thing. Here's the thing about education, and this is especially true nowadays. That like I've made my problems with the Prussian model of education very clear. But here's the thing: like the Prussian model, it's the basis for which our modern educational system is based on.
I didn't know it was Prussian. I thought it was based off the factories.
I think it's vaguely similar in the sense that it's designed essentially to mass produce minds and mold them into a highly regimented, highly controlled, strict hierarchical system designed to produce obedience to authority and unquestioning compliance.
That sounds a lot like what someone... Okay, I get that you're going to call me a statist because that's what the blanket term is for everyone who doesn't believe in anarchy. But you got to admit, there are definitely actual nuances between me and other people, who are like, Clinton and globalists and stuff like that.
Oh, without question. Don't worry about that. That's perfectly fine. My background was I was a conservative and a minarchist myself, so I understand.
Yeah.
That said, there's no way to quantify how big a smaller government is.
Yeah. I think there's a way to quantify how much a smaller than now government would be.
Not really.
Oh, come on. What about if we got rid of alimony? We abolished it as a thing. I think that would be good too, because I mean, so few people know this. Alimony is not child support. Alimony pays for the woman to stay in the living conditions she's accustomed to.
Oh yeah. I mean, I'm not going to say like whether or not that's a bigger or smaller government. I mean, it probably would be
Smaller.
a way to make it a less intrusive in your life. However, I think it's a good. I mean, anything that causes a coercive monopoly to have less of an effect in your life, generally a virtue.
Well, you know, I actually wanted to get super rich, and that's part of the reason why I've been designing that these different machines for self-defense. Which, by the way, as I said to the volunteer, as I just mentioned to the voluntary consumer, who I'm going to tweet it later soon, just to let him know what went wrong. I was designing a pressure system for an injection device that would inject a neurotoxin into someone's body, and the neurotoxin was designed to only last like 2 minutes. Although my chemist that I'm trying to talk to that I want to pay, he says since it's commission based and he hasn't made it yet, you know, we're trying to make sure it doesn't kill the person. It's designed in case someone like a woman was getting attacked by a giant dude, like a massive muscular dude.
Wait. Hold up for a second. You're designing an injection system to inject people with a neurotoxin, and you're not trying to kill them?
Well, I don't. Well, we'll have other versions that can be deadly, but this would be, you know, I don't want to cause someone death if we can just like make them, you know, unable to move their arms for like 2 minutes, and then watch as the police tase their balls.
Oh, that's horrible.
What do you mean?
You know how psychotic the police are, right?
Depends on who, but believe me, I have interacted with the police. It seems like the police that come at night, they know that they're kind of outnumbered in a dark corner, you know, with unpredictable people, because people are a lot more drunk at night, so they seem to be a lot more friendly. But daytime police, they're assholes. Like I've interacted with them.
Yeah, I mean, just like I've been thinking about doing a thing about like police, doing more things about police brutality.
Would you agree to like maybe like privately managed, publicly owned?
No.
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 Not even as a step forward?
It's an unnecessary step forward. And if you think you can really like keep it if you really think you can keep it public, I think you're mistaken, for the simple fact that it's the nature of the state to continuously grow and expand its influence.
Well, I think it's the nature of humans is to take more and more, but the state is the only thing that can do that by force.
Well, the state is the only organization that can do this by force, which is a power that they give themselves because they have a monopoly on arbitration.
You mean basically on violence, I'm guessing, is what you mean by arbitration?
It's more, arbitration is basically the ability to just be the authority in deciding like what is right and wrong.
Ooh, that's a bit dark.
Yeah, so when they can decide like that violating private property is wrong, except when we do it, then I mean the monopoly on violence comes from their monopoly on arbitration.
But I think well, here's one of the things. Here's the reason why I wanted to talk to you about judges. At some point, you kind of have to have that if you want to actually have a functioning justice system, where someone can say, "No, I don't agree with this judge. Let's go somewhere else," and that assumes they'll stick around if someone commits a crime against you, or they'll even show up.
Well, I mean, like that's going to be a thing for the free market to figure out, and we've already had examples of this being solved in the past. For example, we have the system of Brennan Law in ancient Ireland, where a system of private judges known as Brennans would be contracted out to the private courts called Tuatha, and everybody would want to have their case adjudicated by the most credible and the most fair, the most impartial judge they possibly could. And both parties would essentially negotiate on which Brennan specifically, or which school of Brennan thought they would prefer to have their case adjudicated by. Naturally, you have, say, a criminal who's want to have the most fair judge, and you're going to have a prosecutor who's going to want to have the most strict judge. So, it's going to be the same way as any free market interaction with two people with opposing viewpoints, where they have to negotiate on. Excuse me, I wasn't finished. Where they have to negotiate on a somewhere in the middle.
Well, but the problem with that is, what if they don't like the verdict? Do they have to like sign an agreement that says we agree to allow the courts to enforce on us after the judgment has been ruled or something?
The whole point of the court case taking place in the first place is that both parties agree to abide by the ruling. I mean, there's no way the case could happen without it.
Yeah, but what if someone doesn't even want to face judgment and it's a complex case?
If someone doesn't want to pay judgment, then it's entirely possible that the judgment could be done in absentia.
Absentia?
In absentia, like if a person is just being completely stubborn and does not want it to be adjudicated at all, I mean, it's going to be very easy to make the argument that they're guilty and they're just trying to cover their ass.
Oh, so what you're saying is you can go out and get your own justice if the person isn't willing to face trial.
Very much so, and that makes it that gives the person who is a criminal an incentive to want to participate and negotiate for a better judge. This assumes that if they're a guilty party, I mean, chances are they probably won't want it to go to trial at all, since it'll be more costly for them in the end, since any criminal in a restorative justice system will undoubtedly be required to pay for the court costs of their victim to have this case adjudicated in the first place. And if they're innocent, well, they're going to want this to be adjudicated completely and try to exonerate themselves.
I can kind of see that to a certain degree, but I think that it's more complex than that. I think there's more laws than just the non-aggression principle that would apply on multiple occasions.
Well, the non-aggression principle is simply going to be the basis for law. I mean, it's, in a way, like the way law is going to work is that there's not going to be a single legal code. It'll be a polycentric legal system based on an insurance model where individuals will decide like what protection they want and what it is that people are not allowed to have done to them.
But what about the ability to go to school in a society where where it's all privatized? It may seem like it would be cheaper, but let's say someone's completely abandoned by their parents, which would probably be against the law, but you didn't catch them, and they have nowhere to go. And someone could say charities and whatnot, but even they are only so capable. And then you have an end balance of opportunity. Like I don't believe we all should have the same outcome, but I mean, I think we should all be given the same chance to succeed, and then have our success be based on our merits.
I'm sorry, I don't understand the relevance of this to the previous point we were just talking about.
Well, but I'm saying it goes to the idea that something should be guaranteed to be given no matter what. And then if you and that would be a law that I think would have to go into place. I know it's a bit vague.
That's a completely different understanding of law than what I described. What I'm describing is like a negative law that protects negative rights. You're describing a positive law that will necessarily come at the expense of someone else. Now, this could be done. What you're describing, you already answered your own question that it can be done by a private charity. This can be done by all sorts of people of goodwill who will almost certainly sympathize, who will almost certainly want to help this poor child who was abandoned by their family. And honestly, I think all our hearts would bleed for them.
I think that that's a little bit more generous than than is really the case. Because here's the thing. I've worked with the Republican Party of Wisconsin. I know this sounds like a bit of a tangent, but it's not. We, when it comes to donations, yeah, we're a political party, so people are less willing to donate. But I've also worked with animal rights groups and animal shelters. And there really is the 80-20 rule. And the 80-20 rule heavily reduces the amount of funds that can go to someone. And to the point where it might even become ineffective. Money does talk. And if one person, and by the way, if you have it where it's anarchy, I feel that there would be some people who could actually reimpose the state by being wealthy enough to manipulate the emotions of the population, and that assumes that people that we don't that if we were to try to put in an anarchist I don't want to call it a state, but nation or whatever.
Anarchist society.
Anarchist society. Thank you. That we would even be able to prevent people from killing each other, depending on how fast we transition. If everyone just said, if it just happened overnight, we'd probably all start fighting. We'd have to do it slowly.
You're asking. We're going way off topic here.
Sorry. But I'm saying like when it comes to the actual sufficiency of private charities, while they do a good job with each dollar, the total dollar amount usually adds up to a lot less, which in some ways is good, but in other ways isn't really that good, considering how much it takes to run a school, how much it takes to get someone educated enough to live in this very, very heavily, rapidly advancing society. It just seems almost impractical.
Again, we're going off topic here. So if you want to talk about schools, I'm happy to talk about schools and how schools might run under in an anarchist society.
All right. Well, also, do you think that this was kind of just a bad point that someone made? Because this has been on my head for a while when it comes to courts. Like, I think Dapperton said this or at some point, which, that should tell you a lot as it is. But he said, like, one of the biggest problem, one problem that, not the biggest, one of the problems with courts nowadays is that, like, you see all the people, the civil servants, they get to, like, park in front while everyone else has to walk. My response to that was, that seems like a really lame point to make, especially since we know that judges see many people on a daily basis, probably more than we do, but they're in a position where they have power, because if you're a judge, that automatically makes you a person of power. They see many people, and many people may not like the rulings that they make. They have to be able to get inside secure doors with security right away. It's just kind of a safety thing.
Yeah, and I'm not really against it. I mean, you can say the same thing about a corporate CEO having parking spaces like right next to the front door.
Yeah, I just want to get that out of the way. It just was something that was boggling around my head. I thought it was a really stupid point.
It's kind of a silly point. Like, I get where he's going with that, in the sense that civil servants have privilege, but I mean, it's not really. It's kind of one that makes sense.
Yeah,
I can understand the logic behind it. Like, I think you're right about that.
Yeah, and now, so let's talk about the whole. You can go out and get justice for yourself if someone doesn't show up. What about the chance? What about the chance that that maybe you do it yourself anyway, and you just say the person would have never showed up in the first place?
If you say the person would have never showed up in the first place, I doubt any judge who wishes to retain their credibility would even entertain that case.
Well, how would the judge enforce that? Like, would he have to pay a lot of money to a private security company to hunt you down?
No, we just say, get out of here.
So you'd be abolished from the land.
No. He just say, like, get out of my courtroom. There's no judge that would even that has any concern about their credibility would entertain a case that you're trying to do without the other party's knowledge.
Yeah, but I'm saying if he can't if he can't punish you for for something that would be also considered a crime if it broke the nap, because I think that does kind of break the nap if, like, let's say that person escapes and isn't the nap for immediate danger.
Let me answer that question with a question. Suppose, sure. And this is an example I've heard before. Suppose I steal your bike.
Yeah.
And this is done while you're at work or something, and I take it away.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so it's gone. You don't know what happened to it. You call your private security company, and they're not able to come to a resolution. And so, as far as you're aware, it's gone. So then you're driving home one day from work. You decide to take an alternate route, and you see your bike in my yard.
Yeah.
And you go out. You can tell that I'm not there. You inspect it just to make sure it is your bike. You recognize all the scratches and scuff marks that signify that this is definitely your bike. Are you justified in stealing it back?
But that wouldn't necessarily be the same thing. What if I just decided to wait till you got home and shoot you and then take the bike?
That's a different question altogether. I'm asking. That's a different question altogether. I'm asking, are you justified in stealing it back?
Sure.
It's your property and it was stolen from you, so yes, you were stolen. So it is entirely legitimate for restitution of violations of the non-aggression principle to be delayed for a bit. There's no expiration date on justice, basically.
Except, what if that person stole something from you, but you were in immediate danger, and then your retort is to shoot him? Because that would still, be you taking it out on like trying to get justice back, because maybe in your mind that person will continue to steal and you're putting them down for good.
That's why your response for non-aggression principle violations have to be proportional. I mean, at that point you're significantly escalating the situation and causing harm in excess of what was caused to you, and I doubt that there would be very many private security agencies that would be willing to say that your actions were justified, especially if you waited outside my house to shoot me and then steal your bike back. Like, at that point, like, my private security agency would just be like, okay, you owe us money now.
Yeah.
Bitch.
But even then, fulfilling, like if they said you owe us money, I just never chose to pay you back.
If you, I believe that's a question of, like, a judge would rule that, say you've been found guilty and now you owe me restitution and you chose not to pay it back. Like, what would happen?
Oh, then you'd have the justification to shoot me or to...
No, it's more along the lines of society has a justification for not doing business with you. Essentially, you'd be blacklisted from society.
Huh.
So what happens is that, say you're a bike thief, or rather I'm a bike thief. Let's make myself the target here. So you can prove that I stole your bike, and this bike is important to you. It's like $200, but you weren't during the course of the investigation and the trial, you weren't able to use your bike, which prevented you from being able to go to work. So plus you had to pay the cost of the investigation of your private security agency and the cost of the court fees. So that all adds up to, say, I don't know, $2,000. That number is arbitrary, by the way. Just saying that I would owe you $2,000 and I choose to not pay it, then what would happen is that all of society would know that I am a bike thief because they're all networked with the private courts. And what would happen is that if I went to buy a cheeseburger, the local Burger King would know that I'm a bike thief, and in order to preserve their own reputation, they would want to do business with me.
Well, but there is a bit of a problem there. That's assuming that they would all cooperate. And if you can get enough people, even if it's very, very few, to cooperate with you, then you could probably still continue living on without ever having to pay restitution, especially since people are not as rational or as moral as you might think. Have you ever heard of the Stanford prison? Well, actually, everyone's heard of that. But
of course.
Okay, so there's also what was it called? There's also, like, I forgot what it was called. I think it was not the McNaughton test. This is the test insanity. That's totally different. What was it? Oh, I can't remember what the name of the experiment was. But what it was is there would be an actor paid to sit in a room with fake electrodes to his body, and real participants would be told by a real scientist to ask him some questions, and every time he got it wrong, give him some more shocks, and it would keep the voltage up, even and that the person could leave at any time. But even if the person would keep asking to go higher, even if they're saying I want out of here, and they seem like they're going to die, and it tested morality, and people kept going and going and going, even when you could tell that they didn't want to. And they were never forced by anything. And the guy just wore a suit and a lab coat underneath it to make him look official.
I know about that experiment.
You don't remember the name?
I'm actually terrible with names, so I would not remember. But
No.
I know the experiment you're talking about, and that experiment showed that the power of even perceived authority is extremely powerful and causes people to feel that it's justified in killing someone. I mean, after all, they're essentially outsourcing their morality to the authority figure. And
Yeah.
this was largely used to explain how it is that perfectly ordinary people in, say, Nazi Germany could function in a concentration camp. Well, I mean, after all, they weren't morally culpable. They were just following orders. For them, that
Yeah.
was probably a legitimate justification.
Yeah. Oh,
But
and
but in terms of how this is relevant to what we were talking about, I can't say it's quite clear.
well, the first thing is, first off, let's say that maybe, well, okay, so what first thing is the general point was that in general, morality isn't always secure with human beings. And so, and you'd be heavily relying on people all saying universally, it's immoral to do business with this person. Even if that person was very good at smooth talking with a silver tongue to people, even if he had like maybe like some like dirt on these people for things that are not actually crimes or even morally wrong, but they lived in a society that didn't like X, Y, and Z, like and they could essentially do the same thing back, because humans are emotional, and and actually that was the main point. It was that humans are very emotional. They're not always as logical as I think they would need to be
Uh,
for what we're talking about to function.
Hold on a second. If people are willing to substitute their morality for perceived authority,
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't the established credibility of the judges be all the justification they need to not do business with someone?
It depends on who they care about more. Like, what if they care? What if they care?
Well, here's the thing. For a judge to even be able to keep their job as a judge, their incentive is to be as fair, unbiased, and credible as possible. Because if they aren't, then they're just going to be bought out by other judges that are willing to do these things. So they're going to,
Well,
the chances are they're going to be like the most like perceived as very high, very credible, very fair, and very I already said credible people in society.
I could see how a judge might how a judge could use like maybe like dressing very very well and having certain symbols on certain areas of his clothing, talking in a certain manner to kind of give that emotional feel. This is as I am authority or whatever, and we can make the courts very 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 bold and classic looking, which would definitely give people more emotional reasons to look at them as authority. But even then, what about the authority of the mass public? Like I said, what if this person has like what if they found out that this person was non-monogamous? Now, let's say they never were married, they never cheated, they just like to go to sex dungeons, but they were willing to throw this out to the public if that person did not do business as with them. That is, yes, bribery, but actually, well, blackmail, but it's not putting that person's life in immediate danger. It would, I think that would not only follow the NAP, like at least on a technical level, but people would probably be more afraid of, there's this thing from Machiavelli where he talks about how it's better to be in favor with the people than it is to be with nobility if you have to choose one or the other, because the mass public will always be able to override the nobility if pushed hard enough, while the nobility can still hurt you, but they can't do as much if you have the public on your side.
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Okay, so let's say someone had the ability to send out a whole bunch of dirty pictures of you having like really not raunchy BDSM style gangbang sex to all sorts of newspapers, and because newspapers have to make money, messed up stories like that, even if they're just harmless and even if it's all consensual, get the papers going. And they said, this person said, you do business with me because this judge said that I'm a bad person, or I ruin your life. I ruin your life from a public view standpoint.
So are you talking about judicial corruption?
Yeah, like blackmail. You know,
Okay,
and like,
so you're worried that a judge will abuse their
oh,
power
not a
to
judge.
essentially blackmail people.
Oh no, not a judge, but like let's say they said like, okay, so everyone has been told by these judges that I'm a bad person, which means that all the people who don't want to do business with me that I need to do business with in order to survive are people who sell houses or you know, or maybe apartments, people who, you know, who maybe have access to large amounts of food, and people who have access to potential electricity or Wi-Fi. I could probably sneak my way into into a library that's like, you know, that's like, you know, like a Christian library or something, and get new and borrow Wi-Fi there. I could probably blackmail someone in the housing projects if I find any doubts that, you know, maybe he never was ashamed of this in the past, but kept it to himself because he knew other people would shame him for it. That he likes BDSM, and you know, I'll tell the whole public, and they'll emotionally react and laugh and scorn and mock him. Even if they choose to continue to do business with him, even if they still think he's a good guy, they'll still make fun of him and shame him practically into tears. I could blackmail him and tell him, let me rent here, or else I give the press an extremely juicy story about you that will make you, you look like a fool to the world.
I'm not sure I understand. Like, are you worried that the person
The
who is
authority
the
of the
person?
judges will not be enough.
So you're worried that the person will attempt to blackmail people into doing business with him?
Yeah, and what I'm saying is, I think there's more holes if it's mainly just choosing to not associate with someone than you might perceive. Now, I understand humans are extremely social, and actually, it is very true that you can feel physical pain from being emotionally rejected and ignored by society. So it's definitely a huge survival thing. But the same rules can apply in reverse. And who's to say that if someone didn't have some kind of dirt on you, filthy heretic? Like, I'm not saying you have anything bad, but let's find out. Let's just say you did something, I don't know, something that doesn't actually harm people, but most people would mock and laugh at you for. If that person sold that story to the press, that doesn't put you in immediate danger, but it might bully you away. It might make you feel like you'll always be embarrassed to go outside. You know what I mean? People will make fun of you and mock you and stuff. You know, that's something that can be applied right away in reverse. They can.
I don't understand. You're just you're gish galloping on this scenario that you spent like 10 minutes trying to describe, and I'm no less able to answer it.
I'm sorry. You know, I guess I'm not doing a very good of a job of explaining. What I'm trying to say is, if
put in 20 words or less.
Okay. If the only punishments for not cooperating with the private courts is not the word exile, but ostracization, that doesn't seem like enough to keep some to coerce someone. Coerce is a terrible word, but for lack of a better word, coerce someone into paying a fine. It doesn't seem like enough.
That's someone's probably can correct me on that, but that was 28 words.
I know. I tried to get to 20 words the best I could.
All right. So, anyways,
as long as it was less words.
Mm-hmm. Well, the simple fact of the matter is that it's not just not being able to buy a house or buy a burger or buy clothes or anything, but any dwellings that you already live in, electricity will be shut off, your water will be shut off, you're probably going to be evicted, you're probably going to have a hard time having or even keeping a job. You're going to have basically just a really difficult time participating in society. And given that society is largely going to be reputation based, having that kind of damage to your reputation is, I mean, that's the question of whether or not that's worth, say, $2,000 or not to you is something that you're going to have to make. I mean, like, this can all be, that's the point of the $2,000, that you have to pay that back, or you're basically stuck with this stigma, and no one's going to want to do business with you. If you pay back to publicly, yeah, and if you're able to pay back to $2,000, it means that you made a mistake and you're willing to make the corrections needed.
Kind of like confession or something, you know. You tell someone who can't technically see you, but they can hear your voice.
Pretty much.
Even then, it just seems like
You already know, you already explained it yourself that social ostracism can be just as damaging as physical punishment, and you have instances, you have studies of people who in isolation experience the same anxiety and stress as people who are being physically tortured. So you're essentially isolating people from society and doing nothing that would require any sort of coercion. At no point was the bike thief or myself coerced into doing anything. This is just people choosing to voluntarily associate, which implies the right to disassociate from me as well.
Yeah, but there's ways of not using force or violence to coerce people into associating with you anyway.
Are you going to bring up the blackmail example?
Well,
in which case, wouldn't society be more outraged that you're using blackmail than what it is that you have blackmailed them on?
Well, people can be mad at more than one thing at a time. I mean, look at how many people hate both Trump and Hillary.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, the whole idea behind the blackmail would be that even if people are even more mad at me for blackmailing you, let's say I was the one who did it, and you owned, like, a housing project that provided food and water, and not food, sorry, water and the utilities, and I bribed you. Sorry, not bribed, but blackmailed you. The second I do that, even if I look worse for it, you also probably will still carry the reputation, and you will probably think about you, not me, or about the fact that you sold something to me. If I keep my mouth shut while there, in your housing project, you might be more willing to allow that to happen versus watching as I get hated more, but you become part of hates as well. People start hating.
Are you sure people won't hate the owner of the housing project more for violating the blacklist?
Well, that depends on whether you think you can get away with hiding me, or whether you can stop me from publishing.
Of course you can't. Of course you can't. It's a free market, so you're gonna have competitors who are going to salivate at the fact that you're hiding someone who's been blacklisted. What's going to happen is that they're gonna advertise that, they're gonna leak that to the media, they're gonna run stories about it, and you're gonna be publicly humiliated.
Well, that's only if they even find out. Like, there's plenty, like,
Well, we're already operating in the realm of hypotheticals because you've already operated under the assumption that the person who is running a housing project happens to have done something, and the person who is blacklisted knows about it, which is already a pile of assumptions. So it's safe to already make some assumptions that this is going to be found out, which I find to be a far, 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 far more likely scenario, because we already know that there will be competitors. They will salivate. They will be watching each other. They will figure out ways to identify blacklisters.
Mm-hmm.
And this will be incredibly, incredibly humiliating, even more so than figuring out that someone visits a BDSM sex dungeon on Saturday nights or something. And even then, it's just like the person who is being in a housing project probably comes out looking better for standing up to someone who was trying to blackmail them.
Even then, there could be other people that they also can not only bribe, but what if they also have like you don't even have to like blackmail someone. You could just steal when someone isn't looking.
Then you're just making the problem worse, in which case you're also stealing from a society that I'm sure you're aware will be armed, and thus they're putting themselves in a very dangerous position. They can try to steal, but that just means that they're putting themselves in a position to be shot.
Well, they can, but what if they're just very good at it? And what if they're someone who likes to live outdoors? And
are we done with the whataboutism?
I think we need to be in hypotheticals, you know, because there's so many things I can see going wrong with this kind of a system. It seems like there's a lot of holes in what the system could or couldn't do. My big concern is, what about people who are, this is why, and here's the thing, I am very pro-gun. I'm very much against, like, I know something.
There's no number of answers I could give you that could satisfy you. And the fact of the matter is that there are a ton of answers. It's just that this constant whataboutism is extremely tiring, exhausting, and doesn't really inform you of anything. The fact of the matter is that these holes you're concerned about are significantly exaggerated under a state system of justice, in which case is not just merely which is not subject to market competition, not subject to review, not subject to oversight, or even the whims, or even, not even the serves the will of the market. And we know they don't serve the will of the people, because the people aren't paying for it voluntarily.
Okay. Whoa. Okay, come on. I mean, it's not subject to true oversight. But to say
it's not subject to oversight.
No. It's not subject to true oversight, which would be direct and transparent. But it is definitely subject when it's small enough to oversight. There's so many cases of kingdoms that were way more restrictive in history, and way more oppressive, that it got overthrown within a month or two by the people themselves. Come on, to say that there's no oversight, especially if we were able to get it to that way. Like, I would want, I know this is talking about not necessarily specifically the judges, but Ancapistan in general. But if we had a minarchist government that was forced to release all of their expenses every single year to everyone, and people were more involved with their local and state governments on a regular basis, I don't think you can call that no oversight.
Well, how do we get them to release their finances?
We put other pressures on them.
What sort of pressures?
Okay, so here's something I really think that would be a good way of putting pressure on them. First off, let's be honest. Most politicians that get into office from large donations from large monopolies. Now, you can argue with whatever you want about, you know, how monopolies come, you know, like whether they come from a free market or if they come from government interference. I've heard both sides, from both sides of the aisle before. But regardless, they exist. Monsanto is definitely one. There's a few, like Koch brothers, Wilkes, stuff like that, Waltons, whatever. But at first, if we broke down a lot of oligopolies and monopolies, that would take away a lot of ability to buy ridiculous amount of ad space everywhere. Now, that's just how to get there. The pressure I would put on the government, if I was in charge, or if I could just get the system in place and see what happens after that, like setting up an experiment. One big pressure would be that all the names of all police officers would have to be public. If we did that, I know it sounds like I know some people will be like, "Whoa, oh my God, what about undercover?" My response is, there are acting classes and disguises, and they're the government. They can lie about their ID, but the person who's going to come to your house that day and arrest you, with any other police officer, these are the people who would give force in the name of the government, would all be well known. If the government started being tyrannical, before the government could even start putting in laws, those laws could heavily be ignored and overturned. If people said, we want to know the name of every cop in this town well, too. Because now their enforcement arm is now public and can be scrutinized heavily. And people, if nobody cooperates with the police, we see this in the ghetto all the time. If nobody cooperates with the police, you know, especially if they're rebellious and violent, police don't even want to enter those areas. There's like, you know, the police in Europe, that even the ones that are allowed to use large weapons, they're, you know, no-go zones are established just like that. You get what I mean?
You said several things there.
Okay, I'm sorry. I gave a lot of examples, but
you did.
The pressure I would put on would be on the enforcement arm of the government. Every single police officer's name would not only be public, but also there would be like pictures of them everywhere.
Well, the funny thing is that in the example you provided, you've already admitted that the police are legally allowed to lie to you.
They can, but it would be pretty hard to do that literally all the time and never show a badge publicly. In fact, if you did that without a whole bunch of blue suited police officers right next to you, well, it would you look pretty. You'd probably get the crap beaten out of you trying to pull away some innocent man that they don't know is being arrested. No, not only that, it would be pretty hard for everyone to continuously lie about their identity if you're an officer without someone saying, "No, I've seen you. You're my next door neighbor."
But you haven't addressed my concern that the police are still allowed to lie to you. Otherwise, you're going to make it legally impossible for police officers to do undercover work. Otherwise, it's like all you have to do to find out if it's an undercover cop is just like give me your name and badge.
No. You see, if someone's undercover, it can be temporary. It can be temporary where people won't know who you are. And let's say if someone were to join in, like, an undercover unit, they could potentially go to another town where they're not as well known. And so this way they could be in an investigation for a few months, wear a disguise, and then eventually have them and police dressed in legitimate uniforms arrest someone. There are already some safeguards in place that were slowly removed by a state that, yes, because people are greedy and people are who make up the states got bigger and bigger, but they were heavily not only slowed down, but I think the biggest problem is we don't have people willing to, bring the government back to where it originally was.
Well, the back to government where it originally was 2 years after the founding. We had the Alien and Sedition Acts.
Go ahead.
Which were massively tyrannical. It didn't even take 2 years before the spirit of the founding was abolished. Most of the founding fathers were still alive.
Okay, so that's an example of tyrannical governments getting overthrown by the people. They are subject to force.
This was 2 years after the founding of the United States. The United States government is still in place. Like 200 plus years after the Alien Sedition Acts.
Yes, but
I mean they were struck down by a Supreme Court. Thank God for that. But the fact of the matter is that it was passed by Congress and signed by the president.
Yeah, but I'm saying even with all that being successful, the government can still exist and yet be brought down quite a few pegs by the people.
The only recourse they seem to have is complete and total abolition, or rather, the only recourse they seem to have is revolution, which in those cases, like, there aren't very many examples of peaceful overthrowings of government throughout history. Peaceful revolutions.
I mean, I like the idea of being as peaceful as you have to be, but you should. But the point of a revolution is that that activism sometimes does change things for the better, and when that activism is ignored, but it's infringing on rights of human beings, that it's reinforced at the point of a gun. Everything that needs to be obeyed is enforced at the point of a gun.
Well, clearly it doesn't need to be obeyed because you're enforcing it at the barrel of a gun.
Well, I mean, come on. I mean, how does the non-aggression principle work unless you can reinforce it, but with violence? If someone tries to aggress onto you first.
Well, that's the point. That the non-aggression principle only tells us what is and is not, what actions can be done against us that are and are not justified. The fact of the matter is, like, you don't need to enforce the non-aggression principle. That's not how it works. It's just simply saying that if someone does X, you can defend yourself.
Yes, with a gun or violence.
Correct.
Exactly.
If they're being violent to you. Well, the difference is that the government is aggressive. It is aggression, and its actions cannot be justified. It is the initiation of force. Just if it's not initiating force, then it's not a government.
Okay. I'm going to say this. If that's the case, Then what's the problem with revolution? If it's a force and can defend yourself.
It's a simple pragmatic argument that when you have a revolution, you're creating a power vacuum that just replaces one government or one violent coercive monopoly with another violent coercive monopoly.
Okay. First off, I think there's still a lot of problems with the whole system that enforces all this. That you were proposing. I don't.
There's far more systems with the government system, which is entirely unjustified. There is no ethical or there is no argument that justifies the existence of the state that is internally consistent.
That it's practical.
It's not even practical. It sucks at everything it does, except when you want to kill lots of people. I mean, that it's really good at, but I don't know about you, but mass genocide is not my thing. Not to insinuate that you're genocidal, just to be clear. But
it's a bit.
I'm sorry I said that, and I realized that someone's going to point out that I called you genocidal in the comments, so I have to clarify.
I know. You were more or less trying to say that you think it'll lead to genocide. Ergo,
I'm not saying it'll lead to genocide. I'm just saying that the government is only good at one thing, and that's killing people.
Yeah, but I don't think that the government at least hasn't committed any mass genocide in the U.S. People could say things. People could give a lot of examples that I could easily debunk.
Let's see. We got there is the Japanese internment, which although it wasn't genocide, it was the internment of a large group of people into concentration camps,
which of course were much more friendly, and you had a much easier time surviving in than Hitler's camps or Stalin's camps ever.
Of course, but that doesn't mean they weren't. That doesn't mean they weren't justified or that they weren't concentration camps. Concentration camps doesn't mean a camp for killing lots of people, which is what the Nazi camps were. These were just like keeping people away from, keeping people segregated from basically the rest of society.
Yeah, but it was pretty much just a prison when you really look at it. It really wasn't much else.
Yeah, but the fact of the matter is that these people, the Japanese, committed no crimes, and they were just put in there preemptively for no other reason than rampant paranoia.
Yes, which quickly died out.
Right, but the fact of the matter is that this action should never have been this action should never have taken place in the first place.
Yes, but there's a lot of actions. We were just talking about how the church has had pedophiles, but that doesn't mean you want to shut down the church. And there's actually been rings inside of the church run by high-ups in the church that have tried to protect them. But the point of it is to change the institution, not to try to just say it can't exist.
Well, the difference is that the church's existence can be justified. The same cannot be said for the state, which is, by its very existence, a violation of the non-aggression principle. I mean, you might disagree with the Catholic Church, but the fact of the matter is, like, they aren't aggressing against you. The state is aggressing against you.
Well, I can see coercion. You have to interact with the state, and maybe not with the church, but when I say maybe, you don't have to. But I could. But at the same time, there are some things that like so.
There is nothing that the state provides that only a coercive monopoly can provide.
I don't want the state to be the only one who provides anything. What I want them to provide is a free version of everything where there can be competition.
You can't have competition when you have a state providing a free version of anything. First off, it's not free because it's paid for by taxpayers. And secondly, they're going to be a significant advantage competitively because any restaurant, just to provide an example, that can force people into giving it money, whether or not it provides food, is going to have a competitive advantage against people who provide or who sell their food regularly on the free markets. It'll be like people who go to the other restaurants will essentially be paying double for food.
No. I don't think that's necessarily true. It would have a monetary advantage, but a competitive would mean that more people not only like it, but want more of it. But look at public schools. You can opt out of associating public schools when it comes to going to them, just not necessarily paying for them.
That's exactly my point. If you go to a private school, you're not only paying property taxes for the public school, but you're also paying tuition for the private school. You're paying double. and that puts the private school at a significant disadvantage.
Well, it wouldn't put it at that much of one if the taxes were more fair. We have a lot of unnecessary tax brackets. Let's try to imagine my society, because we are
No. We're going to stay on the topic here.
No, we have to compare and contrast. That's the only way, to be honest.
If we really want it to be fair, then what you do is you abolish taxation completely and allow them to succeed and fail on their own merits. If it's good, then people will pay for it voluntarily.
Not necessarily either.
Of course they will. Of course they will. Of course they will.
Emotional. Okay, is McDonald's high quality food?
Is what?
McDonald's could make their food at the same price, with less crap in it, with a lot less unnecessary fats and sugars, and still be close to being as profitable. Just because something is profitable doesn't mean it's good for you. Or
for assuming that McDonald's operates in a free market environment, which it doesn't. I mean, for one thing, like high fructose corn syrup gets massive subsidies from the federal government. So
yeah, but even if they started to, even if they and eventually like let's say in 1 year they were completely in a free environment, they would definitely have a lot more competitors that were willing to take a stab at them and lower how profitable they are.
Actually, let me check something up.
But not by nearly as much as I think you are. Humans are manipulatable. They oftentimes like instant gratification. And if you can keep someone fat and stupid, you can get them to interact with you, even if they know they shouldn't, and even if they're not forced to. Think about it. Part of the reason why sugar is so addicting is because thousands of years ago we were barely getting by. We were barely able to even get any food whatsoever, and sugar was very, very rare, especially refined sugar. So immediately, if you found sugar in the wild, oh my God, you have such a better time like surviving. But versus now, where it's just you can buy it at the store easily. Then imagine someone gives you a really, really cheap burger that you can buy anywhere in the United States and pretty much around the world, and it's just full of sugar and fats and salt and low quality meats that probably has some bad negative health effects. Even if they were telling you, yeah, this is what we make, you would probably still not be think to yourself, I'm still going to have it regularly. Obesity is caused by convenience, an overabundance of convenience.
Well, you're assuming the effect without recognizing the cause, and in fact, there's a lot of ways that the federal government intrudes on food. For example, millions and millions of tons of produce is destroyed by the federal government as a matter of agricultural policy. It's done specific. It's a Great Depression era regulation done specifically to artificially increase the price of produce. And I don't remember what the exact number is, but in the law there actually is a price floor for how cheap milk is allowed to get per gallon.
That's not only not in every state. You're talking about price ceilings.
No, actually price floors. How cheap things are allowed to get.
But price floors aren't even every government's policy either. In fact, that really died out heavily in New York. They tried that for a long time with both price ceilings and price floors, and it very quickly turned on them.
Of course, because it's a terrible idea. But we still have the problem with agricultural goods being made artificially expensive because the federal government destroys produce and goods as a matter of policy. So if you want to know why unhealthy food is expensive, the problem is usually the state because, as I mentioned before, there are heavy subsidized to corn products, particularly for ethanol, but it also goes into sugar and high fructose corn syrup, while also deliberately trying to make healthy alternatives such as produce more expensive. So yes, people eating unhealthy, they're only responding to the incentives that they create, and the incentives are caused by the federal government. It's the same thing freaking over and over again. It's not even that the federal government is unethical, but the fact of the matter is that it just sucks at what it does.
Well, So first off, most people will not rely on the federal government in an anarchist system that heavily. The government will be heavily lowered to the point where it's not really able to do stuff like that, because the government, as I would put it, would be essentially a referee, unable to increase the price or decrease of the price without huge amount of not only lawsuits but also punishments for the individuals in there, because trying to sue the government is a bit hard, but under the system. But it's definitely, but if you can definitely prosecute individuals in the government, considering it's a bit of a somewhat of a free for all, you have much more success. Especially if you can say that this was done behind people's eyes. This was not allowed to be published or even found out about. That would be the only way they could do it in a minarchist system, because minarchism demands that the governments only make laws to protect people. And when I say protect, I mean protect in that no one's able to do X to the other person. Even if they are not able to increase or decrease prices of something.
Even if the voters want it.
Even if the voters want it, because this is the point of a constitution, to take away a lot of the ability to vote on specific issues rather than individual governance, because there are some things that should not be up to the public in the first place. They should be an individual decision.
Well, we already have a constitution that was designed specifically to reduce the size and power of government, and now we spend so much on welfare that we have, like, what is it, 75% of the federal budget is being put onto spending programs, and large percentages of it is non-discretionary spending. So the fact of the matter is, like, this isn't an academic example. This has been tried, and quite frankly, the idea that
but there are some good.
Quite frankly, the idea that you won't get welfare when you continue to have Democratic voters who are just incentivized to spend other people's money because that's how the Treasury of the Commons works, I think is wishful thinking at best.
Yeah, well, here's the big problem with what you just said. First off, let's be honest. America didn't start off on very good terms. We started off with slavery, and when we started off with slavery, we immediately gave a certain subgroup that a lot of people could feel guilty for. I'm not calling black people subhuman. I mean, they're a smaller group.
Of course.
Yeah. But you know what, Huffington Post? If you really want to, quote mine the fuck out of that. If it makes you feel good, do whatever you like. I know that. I know.
Can I just say something real quick?
What's up?
Okay. So people constantly bring up the what's it called, the 3/5 compromise, about how slaves were considered 3/5 a person, and therefore, according to the founders, slave or black people were 3/5 of a person. No, it had nothing to do with personhood. It had everything to do with counting population for the purposes of determining the number of seats in the House of the Representatives. That's all the 3/5 compromise was about. It had nothing to do with 3/5 of blacks being 3/5 of the person. And the fact of the matter is, there were plenty of non-slave blacks in America at the time.
Depends on
that's all.
What do you mean by plenty anyway? What percent? And where in America?
I don't have that number off the top of my head.
Okay, could you get like ballpark it? Like
I'd probably say like 0.5 to 1%. This is just a guess, by the way. I don't know. I don't think I've seen those numbers, but I do know that they did exist. I mean, if I recall correctly, the first person to, or one of the people killed during the Boston Massacre, was a black person.
And it was free, I know. But one of the problems with that, though, is it seems like they're a red herring. And the thing is, as the black population started to grow in the United States, after they were emancipated, you had a large...
This is a side point, by the way. This is like not meant for it to be a thing about discussion.
I think this is important, though. Because the thing is, when you... Okay, sure. Fine. Well, let's just get to the point I was trying to make. You had these black people who were emancipated, and once they were emancipated, which was a good thing, they were used by the Democrats for a victim complex. And these people realized if you want people to become... if you want them to be subservient, make them dependent. Like how the best way to make a dog yield to you is to control their food. A dog can go out on the wild and fight for food, but again, you know, not only did they incentivize them with welfare, but they also punished them for working harder by increasing taxes. Now, when you had a large group of people who were able to be manipulated like this, then you could watch as these people were able to do whatever the Democrats wanted to do, the far lefters wanted to do, which includes subvert the government to becoming bigger and greater, and to say that they were wrong would be to be a complete racist in the eyes of most people. If we had never had slavery, which I understand almost all countries did, which is something we're going to have to get past at some point. We're going to have to move past the slave days and the collective guilt that was put on Americans. If we didn't have that, it would be much harder to convince Black people, who are a minority in the United States and were even bigger minority in the United States back then, to do that. It would be much harder to coerce whites and non-Blacks to going along with whatever the Black vote was manipulated into voting for, which includes bigger governments. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, just one thing, just one quick correction.
Yeah.
After emancipation, the Blacks were pretty much a Republican voting bloc for the next 80, 90 years. It was only after the Great Society and after the Great Society that Lyndon Johnson got the Black people dependent on welfare. And in his words, I'm going to get those N-words voting Democrat for the next 200 years.
Which is hilarious, isn't it?
It kind of shows their motivation, especially when you consider all these pet Democrat causes that were designed specifically to screw over Black people. I mean, did you know that the KKK were the big proponents of gun control?
Yeah, they were also the enforcement arm of the Democrats who lynched Black people on a regular basis once they got them to give up their guns.
Yep, and what's another one? I'm trying to remember. Minimum wage was designed specifically to price Black people from employment. The unions were designed to push or to keep Black people out of employment as well. And another one. I'm trying to recall these off the top of my head, and I'm. Yeah, Planned Parenthood. Margaret Sanger's original intention.
Oh yeah! Oh my God!
I'll let you do the honors.
Oh, ladies and gentlemen, Steven Crowder, Ben Shapiro, and a whole lot of other conservatives. James Alsop. Almost every conservative worth their salt knows exactly this person. The sweet lady, I can't remember her name. God damn, Margaret Sanger. Yes, Margaret Sanger, the saints of all saints, decided we want to kill as many Black people as possible, which is why we will put more Planned Parenthoods in Black neighborhoods than anywhere else. Because Blacks are stupid, and if you tell them that they're not ready to be parents and scare the bejesus out of them, they may just kill off their own.
Yep, yeah. The whole purpose of the Planned Parenthood, and you can find quotes of her talking about this. It was Black genocide.
Yep. She was a huge supporter of Hitler's eugenics program.
Was she? I actually didn't know that.
Well, not publicly, but she sent letters to Germany, I think.
Oh.
Light bulb just turns on like that. You're like, oh, well, that's
embarrassing.
Yeah. But of course, the mass media is so controlled, you'll never hear about it without doing your own research.
No. Yeah, everybody feel free to double check everything we're looking up or we're talking about. By all means, feel free to correct us.
For those who don't know, JFK and the Kennedys were rum runners and bootleggers and mobsters. That's how they started up their fortune. And then they figured out that government is a great way to control people. So that's when they started getting into politics. Yeah. So yeah, that's something. Like I said, minarchists really don't like big government, but I think the biggest argument here is, can the government ever be held down enough by enough actions to not be stressing on the people all the time, and keep it small? You know, where it doesn't constantly require people to constantly make it smaller, where it can small for
it can't be done. As I told you before, the best historical example of an attempted minarchist society was the United States of America. I mean, you look at the United States Constitution, it was designed specifically to limit the amount of power the United States could grab. And what's absolutely hilarious is that the Bill of Rights, when that was being debated, the Federalist argument against the Bill of Rights was that the Constitution, or the government that the Constitution created, was so weak and so powerless that the idea that you would even need a Bill of Rights was just absurd.
Mm-hmm.
And 2 years later, after the Constitution is ratified, you have the Alien Sedition Acts, which, just to be clear, made it illegal for any citizen to criticize the government. And you also had, during the Civil War, you had Abraham Lincoln jailing journalists and suspending habeas corpus. And you had, what's his name, Woodrow Wilson during World War I, who essentially became a dictator for the duration of the war. Those were... yeah. So I just don't think, like, just from a, even if you like don't recognize the ethics and the principles of anarchism applied consistently, and by apply consistency I mean applied to a government, then you should at least understand that you really can't keep it under wraps. You need a vigilant. The best you can hope for is a vigilant population that is consistently paranoid and consistently holding it down, in which case you can't really have a society because everybody's spending all their time trying to hold down the state.
Well, there is something else. I haven't quite figured out what it would be, but I've come up with small ideas that I thought, okay, that's close. But if we have something that the governments cannot force from us, because it would be literally like trying to like grab smoke with your bare hands that they required, it would also be a good way of making sure that the government didn't get too big, as long as it was something that was so dear to the people of the United States that you would have to literally convince them to want to commit suicide immediately, like put a gun to their head, not just slowly, but commit suicide in order to give up. If you have something that someone wants, it also makes it so that way that they have a hard time getting rid of you, because that's the number one thing that we're afraid of, that most people are, like you and I are afraid of, people suspicious of the government in general, is that at some point they could just say, nobody's obeying us, let's just kill them all, you know. So if you have something, though, there's a show called Suits. I just started watching it, and at one point, Harvey Specter finds out, spoiler alert, that the person he hired doesn't have a law degree, and so he's getting ready to fire him. But the guy made sure that he was well known to all of Harvey's well-known associates, friends, clients, and everyone. And he said, okay, you can fire me, and I'll just go to the tabloids and newspapers and all your friends and let them know, yeah, I didn't have a law license and you hired me. You know? So he needs them. So if you have something like that, it would require less vigilance and just the knowledge that if the government ever tries anything, you can just refuse this. Fill in the blank to what it would be. Haven't quite figured it out all the way though yet.
Yeah, you can't really convince anyone with a proof or an argument that doesn't really exist. The idea that I understand what you're getting at, that you need a kind of a mutually assured destruction, such that it's really not in the government's interest to become bigger. But I don't think you can really make the case that such a thing even could exist, since at best it's a hypothetical, and at best it's a very intangible, nebulous concept. Meanwhile, the best thing we can possibly do to ensure that a government never becomes too big is to not have one in the first place. We don't need it. They serve no purpose. I mean, so far, I haven't heard any reasonable argument as to why we even need one in the first place. Or, yeah.
Okay, security.
That can be provided by a free market. In fact, people do it all the time. I remember that there's a news story about a neighborhood that removed their police force entirely, and they have a private security force that is actually 8 times as effective.
I know, publicly owned, privately managed.
Mm-hmm. But it can be privately owned.
It can be. Problem is, you have no way of knowing that they won't become tribalistic, knowing that they are way better armed than anyone and create their own government.
That's not really something that they would. That's something that's not really in their interest, since the moment they start doing that is the moment that they aren't making any more money.
That doesn't seem to be a problem. They can coerce. They have way better abilities to fight.
Against an armed population,
yes.
Even in the best case scenario, they're still going to be outnumbered like 100 to 1. The fact of the matter is that they're going to be going against an entirely armed population. Why would an armed security force even be necessary if the entire population is armed? How about that? I mean, everybody's going to want to defend their own property.
Okay, simple case in point number one: an organized group of highly trained individuals will always be more effective if it's just direct combat on combat, even if one of them is a guerrilla force. Than a bunch of disorganized ragtag fighters almost all the time. The reason why America is different is because we have militias that are oftentimes organized themselves. And sure, the people could try to create their own militia, but then what's the point? What's the point of having private security? Second thing...
I think you just answered your own question there. People are already going to have their own militias, and what's the point of owning guns if you're not going to know how to use it? And even then, it's like ragtag militias. Ragtag militias are what defeated the British in the Revolutionary War.
Okay, now let me explain the use. If someone kills you in your own house and takes your stuff and manages to not get caught, which is very, very possible, someone else should have a job of investigating and finding all the evidence, because maybe your family members will try. They'll have their own lives, their own problems, and maybe they'll get somewhat close with not nearly as many resources as an organized group. And if you have private versions of that, not only can they just turn on you, but let's just say that they don't. Let's say that there's this competition, and let's say they're efficient at their job. Big problem. They are limited to the space that they're going to be located in. If you have, even if like a lot of people will say, well, what if like my next door neighbor has one security company and the neighbor after that has another and another, and we all have different ones in the same neighborhood? They're not going to be nearly as effective if they are all spread out and intermixed with each other when it comes to how to officially protect someone. It's just strategically bad, especially if you have someone who's wealthy enough who can just bribe the security company entirely to kick out all the other companies in a certain geographical area. In fact, that's the biggest problem. Money sometimes doesn't care. In fact, money doesn't care, and sometimes the people receiving the money don't care. If they know that there's one person who's going to decide to say, hey, I want all the land here. I already have a huge shit ton of money. Oh, sorry for swearing. I already have... What?
Now I'm going to dig through the recording to find it.
Sorry. Well, at least it's only one.
Just write that down, the timestamp.
Let's say that they have a lot of money and they just want to take over a town. If that company wants to, if they were greedy enough, they could just be convinced, hey, if you do this one time, you don't need to worry about ever competing against anyone else ever. I just gave you an easy monopoly by paying you to take over this town for me, and I'll rule it and force people to pay you. Boom.
So what you're worried about is essentially they'll act like a state.
Yeah.
In which case, I don't see what the problem is.
Okay. They'll act like a state, but there will be no safeguards.
There are no safeguards. There are no safeguards against the state.
There are.
The fact of the matter is that they already turn on people all the time. I mean, you can just go on the freethoughtproject.com and they'll have a story about a police officer who does something stupid, like they fire through a closed door and they end up killing someone, or a flashbang gets thrown into a baby's crib, or police go to the wrong house and summarily execute somebody.
Okay, first off, the flashbang part is a terrible example because that could happen with private security, and flashbangs are designed to be the least lethal version of stunning someone. They were invented, I think, by private companies to sell to both private and public security. So I don't think that's a very good example. That's literally just like, that's this idea of perfect combat.
I don't even need to bring up the Daniel Shaver example.
Oh boy, you probably should.
where the police just gun someone down on their hands and knees for the crime of reaching for their waistband.
Wait a minute, for the crime of looking like you're about to pull a gun. Like, what if the person like did it? Like, there's a difference.
The guy wasn't reaching for a gun. I've seen the video.
Okay, send me the video.
The guy was not reaching for a video. In fact, the matter is that the police were absolutely psychotic.
Oh no, come on! You got to send me the video because I have a feeling that that person went for their waist fast.
No, not at all. The guy was literally crawling on his hands and knees.
Was it okay? But when he reached with his hand, did he reach for it fast?
No.
Okay, I'm gonna have to look at the video myself. It seems very, very suspicious to me.
Oh, the video is extremely unsettling. Just to warn you.
That's fine by me. If I'd rather be unsettled than know the truth, you know.
If I can find it again, chances are it's probably been deleted.
It's all right. It's just if you can find maybe even like some video that's not even on YouTube, and you can send it to me, you know, like in Twitter or whatever in the DMs.
All right.
That would definitely that would help.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, but anyways, what you're worried about happening is essentially that they become a state.
Yes, but our state is designed to be kind of an infighting state. And I think the federal government is way larger than it should have been. The idea was that the states give most of the power to the federal government in the first place, keeping the government from from becoming monolithic.
Problem is that the state, any state, no matter how you designed it, it's going to grow. I mean, its incentive is only to grow because they want to increase their power, or the politicians want to increase their power. Departments want to increase their funding, and thus they have to cannibalize the economy more and more. Now, you can mitigate that by growing the economy, but the state doesn't really provide any products, goods, and services that people want voluntarily, because otherwise they wouldn't need taxpayers to pay for it. So its inevitable conclusion is that it cannibalizes more and more of the economy. This is unavoidable.
The point of any business is to grow larger and larger and eat up all of its competition. Then the point of the mafia is to do the same thing. The point of any tribal group that has no essential government, but maybe a chief system at best, is to do that. This is not exclusive to the governments, but the thing is the point is of American society is to design a government that is easily pushed back from what it will want to do, what all governments want to do, but in a way where it's very effective to push it back. Where it's very
the difference between a corporation or any organization is that the government has a monopoly on arbitration, and it gives itself a monopoly on violence. So it exists in a completely different moral category. When the government tries to grow, it cannibalizes everybody else in doing so, and it does so through violence. The only way you could possibly avoid this is by admitting that the growth of the government isn't inherently a good thing.
No. A monopoly could form in an anarchist government easily, and then price everyone else from trying to override them. I mean, if you took away the government today, the Walden family could still have it where they have so many products at their store that if there's some group of people that doesn't want to do business with them, or some store that doesn't want to do business with them, they can just raise their prices a little bit, just a few cents more on everything in the store, and lower their prices heavily on the one product, and watch as that business that want to start up dwindles just from the free market alone. Because
all right, well, if you want to talk about monopolies, I can easily address that question. In fact, the matter is, it's not even hard. But we're focusing on the federal government at the time because, or not the federal government, but the state in general, because you still haven't answered the question of the inherent necessity and nature of the government, that it will grow, it will continuously absorb, it will cannibalize the economy, and it will continue until there is nothing left to absorb. As to paraphrase Margaret Thatcher, the problem with government is that eventually you run out of other people's money.
Okay, here's the reason why. Universal laws enforced with universally recognized force. Now, the big thing about that is this takes away the need for private court systems because there are so many other things that I could see. You say that like they would want the most fair judge. What
I
if
mean,
they
of
just want
course.
the
I
most
mean,
corrupt judge?
it's not they in a general sense, but the market, the consumers, the people who would be trafficking in judges and would need to and would have a economic demand for a court.
Uh-huh. Okay. So here you go. Here's the biggest problem with that. First off, they could just keep delaying which judge they want because they'll say, I don't want this judge, I don't want this judge with someone who actually was the victim of a real crime until they're blue in the face. Someone would have to step in and eventually say, this is what we're going to do. So okay, if you can't enforce,
you're distracting from the point I'm trying to make, which is that the government inexorably wants to grow, and that the only way that this can be avoided is to simply not have a government.
No.
Because there's no question that it's going to grow. So the only way that it's going to grow. There's no way to avoid this.
Okay. So you asked a little bit earlier, though, what service does the government have? Guaranteed universal law. As in, you cannot.
Well, it's not universal.
It should be. There should be some things that are universally considered wrong and enforced at the point of violence to not be allowed to do.
Like what?
Okay. What if you were one of those people who believe that
please do it in 20 words or less.
What?
Please tell me what. Just give me one example of a universal law.
I'll try to minimize it as much as possible, but I'm not going to just go to your rule of 20 words or less. I'll try to make it simple and as few words as possible. If you have someone who believes in something like 14-year-olds can consent, and they find a few other people who do that, immediately you have a system of people who all say, we want to have sex with really young people who could get mentally screwed up. Now, you can make the case, oh, well, there's all this evidence that says that's not okay. And they could always counter with evidence that says, well, here's why a lot of kids are just fine with this. And these would be done on impressionable people who don't have a whole lot of autonomy themselves because they're not emotionally mature enough. You would have to have someone say at some point, universally, this shall not be allowed. There you go.
You just said that the one example of a universal law is age of consent is 14, or age of consent is older than 14.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so here's another one. How about theft is not allowed?
Sure.
What about murder is not allowed?
Sure, but those are pretty mundane ones. There's more than that. What about?
I'm trying to make the point that the idea of the state enforcing universal law is absolutely hypocritical because the state engages in theft and murder all the time. In fact, it can't not.
What about the universal law that should be enforced that some people have tried to argue in the past should not be a law, that drunk driving should be illegal?
Mm-hmm. Well,
okay.
The point I'm trying to make is that
but that's not the now.
You can't have a universal law under a state because it must necessarily create a separate category for itself to engage in the act it needs to engage in. I mean, taxation is theft. This is unavoidable. So the fact that the state engages in taxation means that it necessarily has to violate its own laws.
Okay. What about in a life or death scenario when someone? Okay, so you say that like having the laws not being able to have caveats is bad because that's what it sounds like. It doesn't sound like you're saying that the government has to be unaccountable to its own laws. It sounds like what you're saying is the government has to not have caveats.
No, I'm saying that the law shouldn't have double standards. That's different than a caveat.
But it sounds like what you're calling double standards are just caveats.
No, they aren't. I mean, you'd have to explain how it is that taxation is justified, or how taxation is not theft.
Okay. What if it what if it is not a theft in the idea that it's a necessary tribute that has to be given for the for everyone to live a peaceful life, and it must only be spent on the people. And
That's circular logic.
okay. Okay.
That's circular because you have taxation. Why we need to pay taxes? Because it's necessary.
Yes. Now, maybe an example of it being necessary is roads. If you have private roads everywhere, and you have to pay a toll everywhere, not only is that super inefficient, but what if someone is an absolute fill in the blank that doesn't want to allow people on their private roads? That immediately, even if you were to say, you know, like that person might be priced out of the market, if they focus on just one person, other people might ignore it, and then all of a sudden you were kept from one universal freedom that everyone should have, the freedom to move and have mobility. You took away someone's mobility because almost all houses are surrounded by roads that are primary sources of transportation. If you have that be privatized, even if let's say you had like an ex-girlfriend, she hated you, she owned a road, and she didn't want you traveling on it, and it was a long stretch of road, and you would have to drive way longer to get around it. And that supposes that other people won't hate you. Now she's taken away your ability to freely move around on something that was in the past public. Sure, roads are sometimes really crappily made by the government until the government decides to hire a business to do their roads. But when it comes to the usage of it, if it's private, someone could bully one particular person, take away that person's rights, and then say everyone else gets to drive on the road so long as they don't complain. And people might do it. People might just ignore the fact that you're being singled out because they get it. They get the extremely important natural benefits.
So what you're saying is that our right to property must be sacrificed for your right to mobility.
Why not? These are rights.
Why should you make that decision?
What?
Who gave you that authority to make that decision on my behalf? I might consider my property more important than your mobility.
Okay. Maybe I have the right to take away your ability to find new property, even if it was someone.
You don't though. You don't.
Okay.
You don't get to make it. You don't get to make that decision for me.
And how so? If I own a lot of roads that circulate around a lot of your house, I might be able to close all of them down to you specifically and keep you from moving to another place. Because you can't cross my roads. You can't go on my roads. You'll have to have someone get you in a helicopter and fly you out, at best.
Are you threatening me?
That could be what I could do in an ANCAP society, yes, with the power of private property.
You do realize that's not how private roads would work, right?
How would private roads work? Let's hear it.
All right, here's a better question for you. Do you consider roads important?
Yes.
Do other people consider roads important?
Yes.
Do you believe that there's enough people who exist that believe roads are important that they would be able to pay for roads if they paid for it voluntarily?
Probably. That's assuming that depends on
yes or no. Yes or no.
There's no yes or no answer to that.
Yes, there is. Yes, there is.
Not pay for it.
You already answered that people consider roads important, and you believe that there's enough people that there are a lot of people who consider roads important. So yeah, they'll pay for it. It doesn't even necessarily have to be owned by. One guy. It can be owned by an organization. It can be owned by a business. It could be owned by. It could be owned by, say, a homeowners association or a Hoppy and Community Covenant. It could be owned by, I don't know, some big mega road corporation. It could even be owned by.
On top, there's always a hierarchy, and the person on top could say, "Screw this person. I want him to not drive on my roads." Everyone else.
Give me a second here.
Okay.
Oh yeah, sorry about that. Background noise.
Mm-hmm.
Background noise. Continue.
Yeah, so they could just say, "I don't." Even if it was by a business, there's one owner of said business, who by extension pays for that road. That road could be shut down by saying, I don't want to pay for this particular person.
He doesn't pay for the road, though.
What?
He doesn't pay for the road.
Okay, then what did you mean when you said it could be owned by a business?
It can be owned by several businesses, but the fact of the matter is that most of the things that the businesses does aren't paid for by the business. They're paid for by their customers.
No, that's okay. First off, that's not true. That's okay.
How does do you even know how business works?
What?
You know how business works?
They pay for stuff with profit, but profit means you've already given the money in exchange for an item.
A product, good, or service, yes. But the fact of the matter is that their revenue is dependent entirely on customers.
Mm-hmm.
And so here's a better question: how will a private road get customers? They get people to drive on it. So therefore, the private road's incentive is to get as many people to drive on it as possible. Towards that end, it makes perfect sense for them to want to get you and me to drive on them as much and as often as possible. Now, how the payment model for a road might work, I'm not sure. Maybe you pay like 1 cent every time your tire touches one of their roads.
So like a toll.
Possibly.
Okay,
it could be one model. It could just entirely be that businesses might be willing to just pay for it because they'll want people to be able to access their storefronts, and thus they pay like a subscription, like, I don't know, $20 a month.
Okay. Yeah, but they might care about a large group of people versus a small group. And if, let's say, someone's anti-Semitic, and there's a small group of Jews somewhere, boom. Yes, I know Jews have a lot of money. That's beside the point. They get 90% of the market, and then they can just destroy that last 10%. More people, if they say, hey, if you don't want to drive on our roads, we can just say you don't get the ability to the rest of the people, even if they're being singled out.
Yeah, we're in one aboutism again. Let's be honest here, you lost.
I lost?
Yeah.
You don't want to acknowledge a very, very real scenario that very much could happen. In fact,
the scenario I've already explained that the scenario simply does not cooperate with how the incentives of the roads.
No, it could absolutely do that. It could absolutely do that. Some people's personal bias.
If they want to screw themselves, yeah, they could. But the fact of the matter is that they wouldn't be profitable for very long. They'd be bought out by road companies that would do these things.
No, they could just single out one particular person and watch as everyone else is selfish and says, it's one person. Let's keep driving on the roads, giving them all the money.
Come on. I've already explained this. There's going to be competitors who are going to point this out. They're going to make that person who has been singled out to be a freaking a martyr.
Oh, and you don't think that they could all that these same companies could just these same companies that said the opposites could make it so that way could put enough ads out to make it seem like that person was a terrible person, make up a bunch of lies, and then watch as more people realize it's either we take all the time to get a new company and not know how their services work, and that will affect all of us, or just this one person gets forgotten about. Well, self-absorbed nature, we choose what we are already familiar with.
In that case, why don't we just have a society in which all businesses are run by the government completely? Since there's no arguments that's unique to roads, that doesn't apply to every single business.
It does apply to every single business. The difference is you're talking about a commodity that is way more vital to people's personal freedom than any other. You're not talking about burgers.
Here's a better question.
Yeah.
What if there is a business that's run by just the absolute worst neo-Nazis, like just a restaurant, and they refuse to sell anything to Jews?
Mm-hmm. Okay, my response to that is
it's the same thing as your road example.
Except roads are way, way, way more vital
than food. Than food?
To get food, you have to be able to freely move.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of problems that require mobility that can only be solved by mobility.
But you can walk on a sidewalk.
Oh.
You can take alleys.
What about crossing that road? You're not even allowed to cross it to another sidewalk. And what if that sidewalk's owned by someone?
Who would it be owned by?
The same
Like,
people.
you've lost, man.
I've lost. Oh, I've lost because you can't reply to this.
No, I can. I have, in fact, several times, and if I did, I'd just be going in circles. We've been over this.
There are some things that are so vital to people's ability to do anything, including own a job and go to another business, that if you take that away from an open, free source, it doesn't matter if people.
But it's neither open nor free. I mean, we already know that it's not going to. That we know it's not open because most people can't even participate in the government, and what participation is allowed is, quite frankly, a lie. Because let's be honest, your democracy is crap, and it's definitely not free because it's paid for by taxpayers. And given that it's paid for by taxpayers, I'm assuming you're familiar with the third-party problem, the third-party payer problem, which says that any third party doesn't really care about the quality nor the cost of what it is that's being produced. So therefore, we can extrapolate that whatever it is that the government is providing is going to be more expensive and of less quality.
Okay, so first off, it is open because you just went to a very small niche of politics, which is politics and argumentation in the government itself. You didn't talk about how libraries are open to any U.S. citizen.
You're really bringing up libraries?
Man,
you've got nothing.
All these things.
You're abandoning the roads because you've lost there. Now you're going to libraries.
I'm not abandoning the roads.
This entire discussion, you've been changing the topic over and over again.
Okay, so it's open for anyone to use. Even if you have no money, you don't pay taxes, you can still walk on any public road you want. You can do that. You can go into any library you want and stay there until they close at a certain time of night, which they have the right to do. And as long as you don't make a disturbance, nobody's going to bother you. You stay, and it's a whim of whoever owns it if it's privately owned.
Is it the whim? Is it the arbitrary whim of when a restaurant closes, or is it because that's what their customers want?
They can kick you out before that if they just don't want you there, even if they're still open.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Which means that your paying dollars are going to go somewhere else. However, you might be causing a disturbance, in which case you're still being there is actually going to be more costly. For example, being drunk at a bar.
And if you're not causing a disturbance, they can still refuse you, like they did with Jim Crow. Like where they openly discriminated against black people because there were more whites, so the effects to their dollar was nothing.
Okay, I just want to point out that you identified state and local laws as an example of businesses discriminating.
I'm saying a business doesn't have to worry about the fact that it has a universal rule put in that it cannot discriminate based on race. A business has the right to discriminate based on anything it wants.
That is correct. It does.
Mm-hmm.
That does not mean they do. Or the fact of the matter is that's not their incentive is not to do so. And the only reason discrimination occurred during Jim Crow is because Jim Crow was a government policy.
Well, no, there was even more. There was private businesses that had the ability in northern states to serve black people that openly discriminated against them.
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
and that's why it's not done today, because it's a terrible business practice. You can just think about it logically, but dollars owned by or dollars in the possession of black people are just as valuable as dollars in possession of white people.
They are, but here's the thing. How many dollars is that? If you discriminate against one person and you own something very, very vital to people, way more vital than a restaurant, people, especially if it's a really small person, in the markets, or it's someone that you were able to say a bunch of lies and bad things about, even if they're not true, people like juicy stories, they may not have enough sympathy to just abandon your place of business. They'll still go to you, and you miss out on the one customer you didn't want business from in the first place, even if the only reason why is because they are black. Do you get what I'm trying to say?
No, I don't.
I'm trying to say it's not as hard to discriminate against a certain group of people because of something that's not significant than you might want to admit to it.
Here's a better question. If a restaurant is discriminating against black people, why would black people want to spend their dollars there?
They wouldn't be allowed to, so that's a non.
No, they wouldn't want to.
Okay.
Not only that, but people who are sympathetic to black people probably wouldn't want to spend their dollars there either. It's a terrible business model. I mean, they could do it, but they lose out on a lot of money. Fact of the matter is, you don't need this. All of this does not require a coercive monopoly to enforce. It's the simple whim of the market.
Okay, first off, the part that you said the second time made a lot more sense the first time, because if you're being discriminated against, meaning you're being told you can't eat here, doesn't matter whether you would give them their money or not. They already said, we don't care about your money, we don't want you here, so that's a non-point. But I'm guessing that was just maybe a firing of words, you know.
Not really. I meant what I said.
Yeah, you just messed up verbally. It's not like that was what you meant, you know. So we'll just put that to the side.
No, I meant what I said.
Wait, what? Wait. Okay, so if you're being told we don't want your business anyway, so your dollars, if they come from you, and they require us to do business with you, we'd rather just not take your dollars. You
probably misheard what I said. What I said was, if you're being discriminated against, you probably don't want to spend your money there anyway.
Yeah, because you don't want to spend your money where you're already told you couldn't spend your money even if you wanted to.
Pretty much. It's meant. What's being put forward is that this is a damage to the vendor's reputation. Okay. That even if they change their business model tomorrow, it's just like, you know what, this is actually a really bad idea. I had a chance to think it over. Black people are allowed. They'll probably just be like, you know what, screw you.
Yeah, but what if you just stuck to that business practice and you got a lot of, and you were able to manipulate people's emotions, which is not that hard to do, and it's been done plenty of times by businesses with no government interference, to keep people coming right on back. All those white people, the whites.
Right, so give me an example.
And the Hispanics and everybody but the blacks.
Give me an example of a business without government interference doing exactly as you described.
Okay. So, what about the drug industry? As in, not Pfizer, but cocaine. Sure, they're illegal entities, but people freely associate with them, and they enjoy doing that.
The illegal drug industry is not a free market. It's not a free market example. It's not an example of zero government, because the reason it is what it is because government escalates force against the drug lords, who are then in turn required to escalate force, and that's why the drug trade is as violent as it is. The fact of the matter is, without our form of neo-prohibition, people would just be able to get cocaine without trouble, and they went to worry about being shot by, I don't know, the remnants of El Chapo's gang.
No. But that does no. You completely missed the point. People who buy the drugs freely associate with them. There is no force saying that you have to buy drugs. There's only force if you steal from them, or if you tip off the cops.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you admit that government is force, is violence.
I never said it wasn't. I said it was necessary.
Well, in that case, you're basically just admitting that the initiation of force is necessary.
I am. I've never hid that. This entire conversation, I never pretended that. I just said there's a lot of cases where it isn't, but there are a few that are. There's not a one-size-fits-all solution to everything.
I know I'm veering a little bit off topic here, but I think this is critically important. Okay. So you understand like how the non-aggression principle works?
Yes.
And you understand the consistency principle?
I understand that consistency is normally a good thing, but sometimes reality says, screw you, there's a caveat, and you need to obey it.
Well, consistency is preferable to inconsistency, and we know this to be the case because to say that inconsistency is preferable to consistency, which is the inverse statement, is to say that it is consistently preferable. That inconsistency is preferable to consistency, which is, of course, a self-contradictory statement.
No, I'm saying consistency is sometimes something that can't always obey reality, because sometimes reality isn't always consistent with the things that we care about.
So give me an example of when reality is inconsistent.
Okay, let me ask you something. How tall are you?
I will not say this on this is not something I will say on YouTube.
That's fine. That's fine. You know what? All right. Fine.
Let's just say 6'0".
Okay, 6'0". Okay, and I'm 6'4". Well, I'm not saying I am that I actually am 6'4". What I'm saying is, let's say that in this example I am. Our bodies would be genetically different. There are universal principles that dictate biology, and biology is again a form of reality.
Yeah.
Biology will sometimes say, doesn't matter that our parents were very, very genetically similar to each other. Like, you know, even if we're not related, doesn't matter that we come from the same race. Doesn't matter that our parents had a very similar way of raising us and feeding us very similar food, or that our grandparents and the parents beyond that are very similar, like really almost to the same. If we are born, we have a very likely chance that I will be born taller than you, and that my muscle insertion will be better than yours, that my twitch muscles will be better than yours. Well, will be different from yours, despite the fact that we have so many other things in common, because reality doesn't always conform to consistency. In fact, there's a lot of times it's very inconsistent. That's one of many examples. I could give you examples of, consistently, if you fire the same Beretta 92 over and over again, it's going to fire the same way. But even with the same design, there's always nuances in how they're built that are going to be different when it comes to the exact thickness, depending on how many allowances you allow when built, in their barrels. And a home, like if you want to protect yourself from a home invasion, there are so many times where reality just does not conform to consistency.
You haven't given me any examples, though.
I have biology. Biology, I just showed you.
No, biology, you didn't. You just said that we have different heights, therefore reality is inconsistent. When in fact you So what you're saying is that reality is inconsistent because we aren't identical?
That's one example of something that is located in reality that shows that reality is a matter of chance, not cause and effect. There isn't always a direct correlation between.
But there is though. I mean, how tall you could possibly be is going to be determined by genetics and the amount of growth hormones corresponding to your kind of diet and exercise when you're growing up. So the fact of the matter is, like, it's not random. It might be like so incredibly complex and minute that you couldn't possibly calculate all the possible variables, but it's not a random process.
I didn't say it was random. I said it was not consistent. Consistency would imply
there was chance. You said there was chance involved.
A lot of chance, a lot more chance than you're giving it credit for. That it's more like poker. It's more like going to a casino to know how you're going to look by the end of it, even if your parents are extremely similar to mine, and their grandparents and their grandparents and their grandparents. It's not like A plus. It's not like A plus B equals C. Almost every single time. It's more like A plus B equals C, D, or E, and it doesn't usually equal F.
Okay, so what you're essentially saying is that science doesn't exist.
Science does exist, but sometimes science says, here's a random...
Is science a spook?
Science is not a spoof, but it doesn't agree with what you're saying. Science sometimes says that there's a multitude of different things that can happen from the exact same events.
Yeah, but those events aren't random. They don't just happen because potatoes.
Oh God. Okay. So what I'm saying is,
what you're suggesting in terms of the inherent inconsistency of the universe completely rejects all of science and reason for the simple fact that if it's inconsistent, if reality is inconsistent, then literally thousands of years of physicists, biologists, astronomers, all of them are just wasting their time.
No, I'm saying it doesn't have consistent results every single time, because Some things will always be consistent, some things are completely random, and some things have a pattern, but no guarantee. There is a certain amount of cause and effect that will happen, but it will cause maybe different effects at different times, depending on what it is.
But so far, you haven't given me an example of
biology.
Biology requires certain principles and understandings of reality to be consistent in order to function.
Oh, okay, dude, it's really late at night. Look, I don't have any personal animosity towards you. I really don't. But I think that we've really exhausted these arguments.
Yeah, I think so as well.
Yeah, I think we're at the point where we're literally trying to light embers on fire. So
probably.
Yeah, but hey, nothing against you personally. Okay.
Yeah, likewise.
Yeah. Well, hey, thank you for being on. I hope could you mirror this on your channel as well?
Yeah, of course. I have the recording. Let me just stop it real fast. Before you go, or before I stop it, mind giving your channel a plug for my audience?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Filthy Frank is a really good YouTuber. Yeah, we definitely got really heated, but that's because he's not a stupid guy. He's a smart guy. You can find him at Filthy Frank, one word, on Twitter. His channel is under the same name. He has a bit of a turtle, it looks like, for a logo. Is that right?
Is
that a turtle?
For Filthy Frank? Who's that?
Oh, sorry, Filthy Frank. I'm sorry, Filthy Heretic. Oh God. Oh, I'm sorry.
It's like wait, what? I was
sorry. There's
I meant plug your channel,
so I'm sorry. Filthy Heretic is who I'm talking about.
Yeah, it's a lizard.
Yeah, it's a lizard.
I probably need to do a redesign because this is like the third time I've heard turtle.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry about the whole Frank thing, but he's a meme, so
yeah. So yeah, but I meant like plug your channel for my audience.
My channel for your audience?
Yes.
Oh, okay. My name is Arcian. Now, everybody knows this, so if you hear me on other streams, I've been on the Andy Worski show a few times. I've been on Ayla, Wife with a Purpose, this stream. They call me Jeremy because that's my first name, and my whole name and everything is already public, so don't worry about that. But I still use the character Arcian, which is the angel of objectivism, on my channel, kind of like how Sargon of Akkad is Carl Benjamin, and everybody already knows that. I'm a minarchist, right-wing YouTuber, and I recently just finished, and tomorrow I'm going to be publishing it, part 3 of The Importance of Taboos and Shame, where I talk about how not everything needs to be regulated by law, but how shame is definitely an important part of human society that has kept humans together for a long time. So thank you for being with me tonight.
You're welcome. Happy to be here.
Yeah. Hey, have a good night, okay?
All right. Yep, you too.
All right. Bye.
Bye.